Welcome to International Trade Minute, Quick Fire Trade News, the essential podcast for today's trade professionals, presented to you by Rydell Law Firm. If you're a seasoned practitioner, this is where you'll find your weekly distilled briefing on the pulse of international commerce and regulation. We bring you the latest legal and trade news, distilled into straightforward, bite-sized updates for busy trade professionals. Sponsored by Rydell Law Firm, this podcast is crafted by expert trade attorneys to keep you ahead of the curve with concise, actionable insights. Perfect for your morning commute or coffee break. Stay informed without the fluff. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and join our professional community on LinkedIn. Today, we're bringing you critical developments shaping our industry, including breaking news on potential new tariff implementations, international reactions to trade threats, updates on semiconductor controls, and important findings on Section 301 exclusion processes. We'll also cover a significant Court of International Trade ruling that could impact duty evasion cases. These stories reflect major shifts in the trade landscape that require your immediate attention. Let's dive into today's headlines and break down what they mean for your practice. For our first story, in a significant development for trade practitioners, President-elect Trump appears poised to implement sweeping tariffs through two potential legal pathways: the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. According to legal experts, IEPA is emerging as the likely frontrunner for swift implementation. To utilize IEPA, Trump would need to declare undocumented immigration and drug trafficking as extraordinary threats to national security. While the statute requires congressional consultation, the law provides broad executive authority with minimal restrictions. Legal challenges to IEPA declarations historically face considerable hurdles, with courts typically reluctant to second-guess presidential determinations of national emergencies. Procedural aspects of implementation, such as exclusion processes and origin determinations, may prove more fertile ground for litigation, rather than challenging the fundamental emergency declaration. This mirrors the current landscape of Section 301 litigation. Section 301 presents an alternative pathway, though with more procedural hurdles that could delay immediate action. However, the existing China tariffs under Section 301 could be expanded, particularly given the pending deadline for response to a new petition regarding fentanyl-related tariffs. Notably, Canada could be included in any emergency declaration despite most migration and fentanyl issues stemming from Mexico. Canadian officials have acknowledged growing concerns about cross-border security issues, potentially providing justification for broader tariff implementation. For trade practitioners, this signals the need to prepare for rapid tariff implementation through IEPA, with particular attention to procedural compliance and documentation requirements. The likelihood of successful broad legal challenges appears limited, suggesting focus should shift to managing practical implementation issues and potential exclusion processes. Into our next piece, the political response to Trump's proposed 25% tariff threat has been swift and varied across North America. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa has taken a notably measured stance, viewing the tariff threat primarily as a negotiating tool. Drawing from past experience, he referenced the previous success with China and suggested these threats may not materialize into actual policy, given Canada and Mexico's economic stake in maintaining stable trade relations. Canadian leadership has already initiated diplomatic efforts to address these concerns. Prime Minister Trudeau's direct call with Trump focused on highlighting the deep commercial ties between the two nations. Canadian officials are emphasizing their commitment to border security while pointing out that Canada purchases more from the U.S. than China, Japan, France, and the U.K. combined. The response from Mexico has taken a firmer tone. President Sheinbaum has warned that retaliatory tariffs would create a cascade effect, potentially damaging both economies. She's highlighted Mexico's existing efforts to manage migration, noting a 75% reduction in border encounters over the past year, while also addressing the complexities of the drug trade by pointing to U.S. domestic demand as a key driver. American political figures, particularly Democrats on the House Ways and Means Committee, have raised concerns about the inflationary impact. Representatives Delben and Beyer have specifically warned about increased costs for American consumers and businesses, with Delben introducing legislation to limit presidential authority on broad tariff implementation. Economic experts are particularly concerned about the combined effect of simultaneous tariffs on both Mexico and China. They warn this could disrupt existing supply chain adjustments and significantly increase inflation risks, potentially undermining the intended policy objectives and creating unintended economic consequences. For trade practitioners, these diverse political responses signal potential challenges in implementation and suggest the need for careful monitoring of diplomatic developments that could affect the final form of any new tariff policies. Up next, a new report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies suggests that current U.S. efforts to control semiconductor manufacturing equipment exports need significant restructuring. The existing approach to convincing allies like Japan and the Netherlands to expand export controls has proven largely ineffective, particularly regarding restrictions on memory and mature logic chip technologies. The researchers proposed several key changes to enhance allied coordination. Rather than relying solely on shared national security concerns about China, the U.S. should consider offering economic incentives and potentially loosening some current restrictions to achieve broader multilateral cooperation. This could include removing controls on less advanced technologies, such as 14 and 16 nanometer chips, while strengthening enforcement mechanisms. The Bureau of Industry and Security could improve its strategy by conducting comprehensive surveys of American chip toolmakers. This data would provide crucial insights into market dynamics and help maximize the effectiveness of existing controls. Understanding how U.S. companies are losing market share to Chinese and third-country competitors is essential for developing sustainable control measures. The report emphasizes that maintaining U.S. technology leadership requires a more nuanced approach that considers competitive semiconductor industry dynamics. The current strategy, which has resulted in significant market share losses for U.S. companies while potentially undermining national security objectives through Chinese circumvention, needs immediate attention. For trade practitioners, this signals a potential shift in U.S. export control strategy. Watch for possible adjustments in control parameters, especially regarding memory chips and mature node technologies, and prepare for increased emphasis on enforcement mechanisms rather than broad restrictions. A fascinating new economic study has revealed significant patterns in how Section 301 tariff exclusions were granted during the previous administration. The research, conducted by finance professors from multiple universities, found that political contributions played a surprising role in the exclusion process. Moving on to our next news, a fascinating new economic study has revealed significant patterns in how Section 301 tariff exclusions were granted during the previous administration. The research, conducted by finance professors from multiple universities, found that political contributions played a surprising role in the exclusion process. While exclusion requests related to China's Made in China 2025 strategy were predictably less likely to succeed, the approval process for other goods showed interesting correlations. The study found that companies making larger political contributions to Republican lawmakers had notably higher success rates in securing exclusions. The data shows that while the overall grant rate for exclusion requests was 14.6%, firms with higher Republican donation levels saw their success rate climb to 18.5%. This pattern held true even when controlling for various factors such as company size, location, and industry sector. Remarkably, common business considerations like product substitutability, manufacturing necessity, or sales volume showed no significant correlation with exclusion approvals. The analysis extended to the extension of exclusions in 2020, where similar patterns emerged. However, the study notes a marked difference in the current administration's approach, with about 90% of existing exclusions being restored through a more standardized process. For trade practitioners, this research underscores the importance of understanding historical patterns in exclusion processes, particularly as we face potential new tariffs on Mexican and Canadian goods. Should similar exclusion mechanisms be implemented for these tariffs, we may see heightened scrutiny of the approval criteria and process transparency. For our concluding story, in a significant ruling, the Court of International Trade has upheld Customs and Border Protection's finding that Skyview Cabinet USA evaded anti-dumping and countervailing duties on wooden cabinets and vanities. This decision comes after addressing a due process violation in the original proceeding. The case took an interesting turn due to procedural requirements established by the Royal Brush Manufacturing decision. Despite having access to previously confidential business information and being given an opportunity to respond, Skyview failed to present any new evidence to challenge CBP's determination. What's particularly noteworthy is how the court addressed Skyview's credibility issues, the company's changing narrative about its manufacturing source, alternating between claiming Rwanda and Roxy Heritage as manufacturers, significantly undermined their position. The court found that photographic evidence presented didn't demonstrate actual cabinet manufacturing in Malaysia, as required by CBP. The court emphasized that Skyview's inconsistent statements about basic facts, particularly regarding the identity of their manufacturer, reinforced CBP's original finding. This ruling effectively demonstrates that simply having access to confidential information isn't enough. Parties must present substantive evidence to successfully challenge evasion determinations. That concludes our coverage of this week's most impactful trade developments. These stories highlight the evolving landscape of international trade law and enforcement, from potential new tariffs to semiconductor controls and duty evasion cases. Thanks for tuning in to International Trade Minute. We hope you found today's episode insightful and useful for your practice. Remember, our podcast is brought to you by Rydell Law Firm, your trusted partner in navigating international trade law. Don't miss our next episode. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Stay connected and continue the conversation with us on LinkedIn. Until next time, stay informed and stay ahead.